I'm just gonna start this video by readjusting my seating position like a big fat fucking clown. Deal with it. Okay, so back to the hexcrawl mines with me. Oh goodness. Okay, so yesterday I had a day off, and I spent that day. Well, I spent that day getting my oil changed, but I went over to the local Denny's, which is the northmost Denny's on planet Earth, according to the placard outside. I think there was a farther north one, but it got closed because nobody likes Denny's. But I went to the world's northmost Denny's while I was getting my oil changed at the local Midas, which always does a really good job, and it's pretty cheap. They do take a little while, though. And so I wrote, as I do, so I took this and I just kind of wrote this down. So I've been doing a lot of different, like, disparate things for this hex crawl, and I think that's because I'm not really sure of how to approach prepping for a hex crawl in a way that makes sense to people that aren't me. Like, it's real easy for me to be like, okay, here's the hexes, here's the random charts, here's the stuff I'm putting in the hexes. Like, I can do that for me, right? But, like, making it something that is a product that people can understand and that it's, like, replicatable and usable in a more, like, in a more approachable fashion, kind of that cookbook fashion I've talked about before, like, that's a little more challenging. So I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do with this. So I kept kind of, like, making it like I'd make something for myself, which proved to be a little chaotic. And then I was like, well, what if I do this? And what if I do this? And I've got a bunch of little disparate chunks that are like somewhat done. Like the terrain generators, I've got like, I think it's like 3 out of 5 done. That's not bad. Like they're pretty dense little things, and you can get a lot out of them. But it's like, what are these for? You know. And so I got to thinking about the game as a product. Like what book is this gonna be? What is this gonna do? And I really sat down and I really planned. All right, so the first thing is I was like, okay, well, if it's going to be a soft cover, because I want it to be something printable you can physically have at your table, I think this will go along and pair really nicely with everything else that's in the game. So I want this to be a physical thing you can have at your table. So I think 120 pages is a reasonable soft cover length, right? My pitch to myself was I'm going to do it like Maze of the Blue Medusa. Upon reflection, I'm doing it a little more like House of Paper Shadows, but the basic idea is that it's a mega dungeon. It's a hex crawl which functions more or less like a mega dungeon. It should be mysterious and big, and you should have a pretty solid sense of place, even though the place is like really enormous, and like it's one of those the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing levels of enormous, where like you can kind of there's a lot of stuff going on that's unified on paper, but in reality it's all wandering around this huge geographic area. So I really wanted that. I wanted that feeling of having a place, but that place being discrete in a huge area. So it was easy to go off on tangents and explore and such. Like I wanted it to be a tremendous place, a sense of being kind of connected. And I don't want just like a bunch of vignettes of adventures that don't have anything to do with each other. I want there to be a pretty solid sense of placehood. And so it kind of became my Yoon Suin, like this is like a setting. It's a hex crawl and it's a setting. But the initial pitch was I'm going to do it as Maze of the Blue Medusa. It was going to be a no prep thing and easily usable. So what that means is, much like Maze, much like House of Paper Shadows, I wanted to be able to, off the cuff, when the players go into the thing, just read the room description and have them cook. Like, I don't want to think about it. I like how much those games pop whenever those modules pop whenever I run them. I never have to worry about what's in the next room with them, because as soon as it becomes relevant, I just pull up that room and read it out, and then there you go. So I don't have to prep for those games. Those games largely run themselves, and I really liked that. That's my eyeball creaking, by the way. I got up at 4 this morning for work, so I'm kind of tired, but I'm dedicated, so I want to write some. And I want to do this video so everybody knows what I'm doing. And also because I like the sound of my own voice, and I'm going to do an interview tomorrow, so I want to make sure my equipment's working. So I got a lot of goals I'm hitting here. Anyway, I made this little, like, I was just kind of, like, sketching out, like, oh, what do I want this to look like? And I was like, well, I kind of want to have, like, and Maze has this cool thing where they've got the image on one part of the page. On the other, there's like the stuff you need for it. So you can just flip the page and like everything you need to run the room is right there in front of you. And I really like that kind of design. I don't know if I'm going to do that exactly, but I really like that kind of design. So I'm going to try to use that pretty consistently in this. So any 2-page spread is, here is the place, so you have a really rock solid idea as a GM of what it looks like and where it is in relation to things, just visually. And then here's the stuff you need to run it, like stats and description and all that stuff. And I want that to really, like, I've really got to fine tune that. I'm going to polish that a lot. So that might take a while polishing it, making it really, really awesome. But, like, I really want that to right in your face. I want it to feel like every time you flip a page, I want you to feel like, oh man, I didn't know what was here, but I like what's here. And I want my players to deal with it. And then I did another one over here for, like, what's a way I can make the NPCs a little richer. And so I have this little graphic over here where I've got their portrait, which I think should be an important part of them, and then their stats are just kind of like off on the side here. Was noticing writing NPC stats that I really don't need many, thanks to the way that the book uses NPCs. So that's really nice. And then I've got their plots over here, the stuff that they're involved in, and I think that that's going to be important, like kind of like figuring out what people are up to. I mean, I'm reading Sons of Lady 88 too. Again, Brennan always beats me to this stuff. But it's really, really cool, and I highly recommend it, by the way, if you're going to do any kind of wuxia gaming. It's absolutely fantastic, but it really inspired this, like that plots, like what people are up to, you kind of got to know. And that's a big flaw with Maze of the Blue Medusa, is that, like, you really, you don't. You've got to read these dense descriptions, and it really goes against the thesis of that product, how much you have to kind of, like, read and get into individual NPCs, what their motives are. Sometimes their motives are really, like, unclear. It's like, okay, so the guy with the cool moon head, who's like my favorite character in the whole thing, wants to get his kids back, I guess is what he wants to do, but like he also isn't just actively doing that. He's really powerful and well connected, and like you'd think that it'd be really hard to get one over on him and for him to lose both of his children, and yet he still managed to fuck it up somehow. And even though like they're located super close to him, he can't find them. It's really weird. Like there's a bunch of stuff like that if you actually read Maze, you're like, wait, what? And that really drags the product down, unfortunately, if you're going to go to use it. Overall, it's great, but that's garbage. Anyway, so I'm going to try to avoid those things by reading everything I do very carefully. Alright, so I then broke it down into the sections and how I wanted it to read. So this whole area right here, this is just me like, okay, what's first? Well, the cover, obviously. And then how do I want to introduce this? And then what else am I going to do? And I'm taking a little inspiration from Maze here. I'm doing the intro to the setting and the intro to the game in the first 2 pages. The intro to the setting is just a little... It's not fiction. It's kind of like the intro I have for Lone Wolf Fist, where it just very rapidly gives you an overview of what we're doing here. And I'm good at writing stuff like that, so no worries there. The intro to the product is going to be a little meatier because I really want to tell people, hey, look, this is how this is intended to be used. So I want to make sure I nail that, and I only want to dedicate 1 page to it, so that might be kind of challenging. I've also got a brief section right after that, which is what are the clans doing here? Just so in case you want to know what's going on with the major clans, you're like, oh, okay, well, there we go. Just some really brief stuff there. Again, 1 page ought to be sufficient for that. Because I'm a little less interested in what the clans are doing as large homogenous groups, because they aren't, right? The clans are really not that big in terms of, like, you know, lone wolf fists and actual, like, powerful NPCs. They're pretty small. Even the major clans are pretty small, like maybe a couple of 100 people, you know, but they have, like, followers, and they have, like, disciples, and they have, like, you know, people like protectorates and people that are under them, and like that's kind of where the size of the clans. It's like the clans as a political entity come from all that other stuff. So when you think of the clans as group, it's way less interesting to me. But like I don't care to put a whole lot of like emphasis on like, oh, what are the clans doing? I'm just going to give you a brief overview because they're disparate, to say the most of them. In their organizational skills. What's more interesting to me is individual NPCs, and I've actually devoted a lot of pages at the end of the thing to those truncated but still rich little stat block things with all the NPCs. So like they individually will have much more rich and actionable motives because they're actual characters. It's so hard to talk about diffuse things like a clan. Like, what does that mean? What are we talking about concretely? And that's what I want to give to GMs is something concrete. Like I don't care for like, oh, the gangrel are no longer part of the Camarilla. Like, okay, what? I hate that shit. Anyway, timelines after that. Dungeons have timelines. I think timelines are really, really useful with hex crawls and dungeons and things like that, especially in a post-apocalyptic setting like my setting or, Dungeons and Dragons. we're like the ancient pre-apocalypse world was one thing, and then something catastrophic happened, and then this is the post-apocalypse of that. So it's like ruins now, and then you can have like more modern history, like, oh, what's been going on here in the last century? What's going on now? So I'm doing that. Again, I have one page and only one page I'm devoting to that. I just don't think like there's a bunch. It's going to be rich, but it's going to be brief. So I don't want people to worry and stress about that. I want GMs to be able I really want GMs to be able to read like less than 10 pages, right before they go into this. So that's kind of my design goal with this is like, look, you are going to kind of broadly need to know like what this place is about and like what this game, what we're doing to approach it, like how you use this, and you kind of want to know like what the big factions are doing here. But for the most part, I want you to just be able to choose your favorite hex and then plop your starting party into it and go. Like, I don't want you to have to read through it. I don't want there to be any discomfort. Like, one of the worst things about most Mega Dungeon products is just how much you have to know about them prior to running them. And the great innovations of things like, again, like House of Paper Shadows is that you can kind of just read the intro to House of Paper Shadows and then just shove your players towards it. And as soon as they're in there, it runs itself. I actually specifically got that on DriveThruRPG because I left my paper copy at home. And I realized I didn't have a PDF copy, so I'm like, you know what, I'll give Brendan $8. And I strongly suggest you give Brendan $8 as well. House of Paper Shadows is very, very cool. It's a huge, sexy wuxia mega dungeon that is very horror themed, and it's got a lot of nifty stuff in there. It's got a very Ravenloft energy to it, like classic black box Ravenloft. So high recommendation for House of Paper Shadows, by the way, which I am reading in anticipation of designing all this stuff. So just throwing that out there. All right, 2-page spreads each. Intro to hex crawling, urban crawling, and tunnel crawling. Now I went over the mechanics for changing between scenes and traveling and things like that within the core book of Lone Wolfist. However, it's always useful to have something right there you can reference and remind yourself how these things are supposed to work. So 2-page spreads each, graphic heavy for hex crawling, urban crawling, and tunnel crawling. I didn't really go into urban crawling in there, so I'm gonna kind of do a brief overview within the book itself. Same thing with tunnel crawling. That's whenever you go to the maze below the world. That's more like dungeon crawling than anything else in the game. And although I was realizing this today at work. Dungeon crawling doesn't make a lot of sense for the Solar Exalted because they always have a torch on their forehead. They can just light up whenever they want to, and they can turn into blazing beacons of fiery death and fist fight any denizen of a dungeon into pulp. So like, there's like no horror in dungeon crawling at all for the Exalts. They're just way too awesome. And it's kind of the same in my game. There's not a lot of danger in a dungeon for one of the Lone Wolf Fists. So the very dungeon-heavy product that I'm doing next, where you go to a flying robot city and it's a gigantic, ultra-mega dungeon, like, it is to a mega dungeon what a mega dungeon is to your living room, like, that's going to be weird. I've got a lot of weird and wacky ideas I'm going to try out, but it's all going to start here with this approach to tunnel crawling. So, because I am curious what it feels like to dungeon crawl in a game like this. I've done dungeon crawls on Exalted before, and they really were just kick open door, fight pile of monsters, go to next room, fight that pile of monsters. So I was much less sophisticated as a dungeoneer back then, you see. But it's not like the Exalted couldn't handle it. Anyway, let me see. Next, I've got, let me see, actually, I revised this a little bit. The problem with working in ink is that if you have a better idea later, you got to be like, oh, well, shit. So initially I was like, let's do the hex map and the hex entries there, but I decided I was going to take those terrain types, and I was going to make each one a region similar to the Yunsuan regions. So like the mountains are going to be like the mountains of the moon, and like the jungle is going to be like Lahag, and the urban ruins are going to be like Old Town. Like it's kind of like giving them a little more personality, so they're not just, oh, there's ruins here. Like, these need to have inhabitants with culture, or to be associated with the nearby culture. The genius of Yunsuan is that it existed like a real place exists, which is to say, there are places like the Black Forest in Germany where I don't think that a lot of people live in the Black Forest. Correct me if I'm wrong, German listeners. But, like, all of both of you. But like, the culture around it still, like, it's a part of them, so if you I live near a gigantic mountain range here in Alaska, and nobody like really lives like on the snowy peaks of the mountains. A lot of people live on the mountainside. Like there's a really nice like developed area there, but like the far side of the mountain range where it's just like ice and glaciers, people don't really live there, but it's kind of part of the identity of living here in Anchorage. So there's legends about it, and there's stories people tell about it, and it's part of the view every single day, and it's kind of an extension of the nearby culture. And the genius of Yunsuan is that all the places, even foreboding places like the old city, which is like this overgrown jungle nightmarescape that's inhabited by monstrous insects and ghosts and things like that, like even that, even though it's not somewhere you would live, it's still like kind of like associated with the nearby culture. And so I wanted to do that with these inhospitable areas. And there's some extremely inhospitable areas here. So I decided to turn them into regions. And with the regions, I budgeted 8 pages each. Now that's including, I want to say I think it's 5 pages of charts. Like nice, big, easy to read charts, not quite as cramped as in the lore section of Lone Wolf Fist, and then like a brief introduction to them. You don't need a ton, but it still wound up being a lot because like there's 5 different ones. It's 40 pages total, and I'm gonna need some art for those 2 to kind of bring them alive. So I'm writing out Kazuki's workload here. So I've got the regions. Then after that, I was gonna do. Okay, now we can get into the hex crawl. So I do the hex map, and then after the hex map, I was going to do the significant points of interest. I was going to do the hex entries next. So the hex entries, I am very inspired by Carcosa, which is actually one of the very first OSR products. I think it's Lamentation of the Flame Princess. It just has hex after hex after hex. Each hex has 2 entries, and some of them are extremely brief, like there's a monster here, or a small monument, or a village of 40 people. Like, real small, but there's so many of them, and each one of them has something to recommend it. It especially because it's old school style and it's very deadly, you kind of have to interact with this stuff in a way where you can't just blaze past it in most cases. So I was really inspired by that, and I would like to fill up all of the hexes, each and every one, all of the nearly 200 hexes that I've got. Actually, I've got the math here somewhere. Let me see. Yeah, because I budgeted 30 pages for this, and I want to say that he got an average of like right at 8 hexes per 2-page spread, so about 4 hexes per page. So yeah, like it's a significant amount. A significant amount of stuff there. But yeah, about 30 pages is what that's going to take. And none of them are going to be huge. Some of them are going to be pretty chunky, and some of them are going to just direct you to the next entry, which is significant points of interest. This is where the urban crawl templates are going to come in play. The cities, dense places that are like dungeons, because again, I want to see if dungeon crawls will work in this game, and like maybe they don't. Maybe you guys just I put them in this thing, we playtest them, and you just break through them, or they just kind of suck, or they fuck with the pacing of the game. I don't know. Let's find out. This is the joy of not having an editor outside of myself, by the way. There's no line editor anymore. I'm like the line editor of this game. So like I can just do stuff like, yeah, let's experiment. Let's see how dungeon crawls work in my post-apocalypse kung fu game. Maybe they suck. That becomes your problem. That might not be a good thing for you, but I think it's fun. Anyway, after that, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Bestiary with any specific monsters that are in here. I budgeted 10 pages for that. Bestiary entries are pretty brief. The treasury, that's for specific artifacts and war vehicles that are like a big deal within this game, within this particular setting. I budgeted 15 pages for that. I might cut that down, depending. Because I put stuff like Tiger Mountain Ghost in here and the Havoc King, which I don't know if I want to repeat those entries from the core book, because you've already got them, right? If you've got the core book, and you need the core book to run this, so I might just reference those into a page number, and that'll cut this down pretty significantly. But I do want to have like unique, cool things you can find. So 15 pages seems reasonable. Powerful NPC stat blocks, 10 pages. It's not a lot. It's not a lot for those NPC stat blocks, and again, I don't think that's unrealistic. I think you really can, because I was doing one of the most powerful bosses that I've put in here so far has been the Fist Bastard, and he is the highest rank you can be. Oh no, he's not the highest rank you can be, but he's pretty high ranked, and he's got the entirety of one of the most powerful styles, which is the 5 gateways, except the Supreme technique. He has a different Supreme, because he couldn't figure it out. He's not a good guy. He's like a bad guy. So he had a different one. And I got him in this tiny little chunk. It was so little. Because I just had to describe his degree, which gave you all of his stats, right? His weapon, which is his bare hands, so there's no stats there. I had to describe the powers he had, which was everything from that style. So that's all I had to write, was everything from that style, except the Supreme. He has the other Supreme. And then I gave the page numbers for both of those. And that was it. I was done. Like, it's not hard to make NPC stat blocks for this, because like the stats are in the core book. Everyone goes off the same template. And you really start to see the genius of that Gygax style stat design. Like, I always thought the monster manual was kind of incomprehensible when I was younger, but once I learned how to read it, I have such appreciation for it as both a game master and a game designer. Because, like, so much information is conveyed so brilliantly. It's such a small format. It's fantastic. So, I am a huge fan of that style, and I'm glad I was able to replicate it with my game. One of the things that wound up being really fun was I had this random idea for a bounties chart for, like, different... If you got a bounty on your head, here are some bounty hunters that could show up. So I decided to devote 4 pages at the end of the game to that. It's going to be 3 different charts for the different tiers of bounty that can be placed on your head. And also, you can place bounties on other people's heads, have these people show up, and ask you for the job. And so this is kind of another way to get in touch with these NPCs. So, like, say that you want to know the kung fu of one of these guys. A really good way to do that is put a huge bounty on someone's head and be like, okay, we're going to wait for them to show up. And once they show up, you just pay them the money and be like, hey, also, I like that signature style of yours. What would you take? Are you taking students right now? So that's fun. It's really fun. The final page count estimation for this is 152 pages. So that's a pretty beefy product, I think. But now that I know what needs to be in it, it's really galvanized me. I've really gotten excited about working on this now, because I can just kind of sit down and work on it, right? I can just, I'm going to do some of this today. So here is the first bit of that work. This is what I'm going to be writing today as soon as I'm done with this. I'd like to put this up and then do Superflex in a couple of hours, have something typed out with this, and show you guys that too, just to show you how well that's working. But here is all the different terrain types and my kind of general thesis for what I want out of those terrain types. And then I've got the names of some of them. And then there's a little bit more down here about the history, the kind of ancient history of the whole setting. Oh, which I've decided to call Transcendent Brutality. Or was it Brutal Transcendence? No, Brutal Transcendence. Actually, I might call it Transcendent Brutality instead. I kind of like ending with brutality. Anyway, but yeah, Brutal Transcendence or Transcendent Brutality, whichever one sounds cooler. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll put a Twitter poll up and make you guys vote or something. Ooh, no, Discord poll. We'll do a Discord poll. But yeah, pop, pop, pop. There it is. This is what I was working on last night as I was falling asleep. And as you can see, I've got some names. For example, the desert, I decided to call Hollow Tomorrows in the southern desert, and the northern desert is called Demon's Wake. Simple but effective. The mountains I've decided to call Zyad-Ur, a.k.a. the Lunar Peaks, where the people of the moon used to live. The jungle I've decided to call the Primal Veldt, because I like the word Veldt, although I might have to look it up, and if it means something stupid, I may change that. A lot of times, I'll read a word, I'll be like, oh, that word is cool, and I'll just associate it with whatever I read it there, and I'll never, like, do the legwork to look it up. So I'll misuse it later on and be like, oh, no, I'm well-read, I know these things. Then I'll look it up in a dictionary and be like, oh, no, I'm actually stupid. Oops. Being broadly read is kind of makes you sound like really, really smart. But, yeah, not really. I guess that's, I wonder if that's probably a plane. There's a different sound with the helicopters when they come off. The toxic one, I called Final Nightmare. I really like that one. That name is inspired by my reading of the chemical hazards of VX gas, which causes intense nightmarish hallucinations as you die because your brain is rotting away. Jesus, it's so horrifying. And the particular tunnels below here, I've decided to call Paracelsus Labyrinth. Back in the day, Kill 6 Billion Demons had a submission contest for background NPCs, and you could either draw them or you could just write about them, having no artistic talent. I just wrote about mine, and this is before I ever played Undertale, though it was after Undertale was out, so it seems derivative now, but it wasn't at the time. I hadn't played it at the time, and my idea for one was a creature called Paracelsi Undyne, who is like this insect lady, basically. It's like based on a water bug. And I really liked that name. So I'm finally recycling the term Paracelsi, which I really digged it. I digged it. And I really want it to be labyrinthian. I want there to be something that feels like a labyrinth. So it's going to kind of oscillate between necropoli, like ancient underground buildings kind of that have like decayed beyond their purpose and they're now like haunted by the undead, because hell yeah. And then it's that or these like claustrophobic winding corridors, and there's like no in between space, so it's either this huge open creepy crypt area or it is just this nightmarish squeeze below the world in absolute darkness. Both good. I also, this last bit right here is just, this is kind of my repackaging of the backstory I already wrote. I had very vague ideas for the backstory, so I decided to sketch it out a little bit, and this is written in the form of a brief legend. The ancient past is conveyed through myth. So basically this is like the creation myth of the very few inhabitants who still actually like are descendants of these people that live in Transcendent Brutality. Also, I might go with Transcendent Brutality. I think that feels a little more like a name to me, so I'll probably go with that one. But yeah, basically I had them broadly divided into northwest and southeast, the moon people and the sun people is what I decided to call them, because I don't really want to invite any kind of comparisons with the real world. I don't even care what these people looked like. I care that they were culturally different and they fought a lot, and then for a while they didn't. So basically the idea is the moon people and the sun people were like two feuding, like, regions, nations, whatever. Then they kind of, like, put things aside and they started to get along, and then their descendants, the Star People, built this giant city that kind of goes through the center of Transcendent Brutality, and it was becoming prosperous and it was becoming peaceful. And then this asshole, the 7 Power Sage, shows up. He's based on the 3 Power Sage. I'd like to think he's either that guy's student or he's just an older, even more powerful version of the 3 Power Sage. And he introduces Kaofu to them. And I want to kind of rebrand it a little bit for the region, so it's Kao-Fu. And much like the term Garmin Bosia, which is just this nonsense dream word that David Lynch made up, I want to subtitle it so it just sounds like nonsense when you hear it, kind of like the lolly lule lo. But the subtitle is going to be the instrumentality of nightmare. You can tell I've been watching Neon Genesis Evangelion. Just basically, he just brings this unnecessary pain and horror to them through this mysterious means. I like Kaofu being mysterious, or like maybe some kind of combination of like technology, kung fu, and philosophy. Like it's something that's just it's almost like God, what is it like? It's like a philosophy. It's like a zeitgeist. You know, it's something that's not. It's really hard to define in really concrete terms, and I like that. I like that because it means that it can be evasive even if you learn things about it. You know, so you could say like, oh, Kaofu is the technology, but it's not just the technology. You can say Kaofu is the philosophy, but it's clearly more than the philosophy. It's what the philosophy enables you to do. You could say Kaofu is the kung fu, but I mean, again, that's part of it. But it's not all of it. You know, you kind of need all of it together. And any one part of it is just like a little tendril of the larger kraken, you know. It all kind of leads back to this. I really feel like the thing about Kaofu that is definitory to it is it's destructive and it's ultimately apocalyptic. It just kind of ruins things inevitably. It's always this downward slide into this horror. And indeed that happens here. Like, so they have a 3 days of fire, which I'm going to call the 3 days of burning, wiped them out, left their place scarred, and now the descendants of those people, who are called the Night People, tell this story. And that's the only people that know anything about this place in any kind of historical way. They have this myth of these things. And all of that's great stuff because it has already allowed me to fill tons of hexes with cool ideas about this. So that's what I wrote down, and I'm going to type that up. And I'm also hoping to get the sections organized so it looks like it's going to look whenever I actually release it, with the proper page count and everything. So that's the current projects. My current writing is just formatting the whole thing so it looks nice, and it looks like it's going to look. It's got like the page count it needs, and it's got the blank pages it needs, and you know, it's got the formats that it needs. And then writing down a couple of the intros to these different terrain types, so they're a little beefier. So that's what's happening tonight, folks. Thanks for sticking with me for this half an hour as I just kind of ramble on and on. Well, let's see if I can post this, and then at some point tonight post all that writing. I've got tomorrow too, so I've got a lot of writing I want to do. But I also want to see that new Mad Max movie, that Furiosa. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Anyway, talk to you later.